This experience happened in 2014. At that time, I had just joined the workforce. I was doing a particularly boring job, working late at every day, and I had no sense of accomplishment. I felt that my life lacked passion and fun. I felt like I was lost and didn't know which direction to go. I knew I needed to find a meaningful direction, but didn't know what to do or where to look for answers. In such a state, I began to question my life choices. I longed to find something to do that made me feel worthwhile. Although I had some friends and family, they seemed unable to really understand my inner feelings and I felt very lonely. One day, I left work very late. The moment I left the office, I felt a sense of relief and release. I wanted to walk home so I could relax a little. There weren't many people on the road. I looked at the night view and it still felt pretty good. When I reached the intersection, I suddenly heard the whistling sound of a car. I subconsciously turned my head and saw a car out of control and was coming towards me. I had no time to dodge, so I could only watch as the car came crashing towards me. At that moment, I felt that the whole world stood still, as if time had become slow. Then I felt a tremendous pain, as if my body had been torn apart. Before I could react, I couldn't see anything. I was taken to the hospital by good people. After a difficult period of first aid, I finally regained some consciousness. However, I felt a strong force was pulling my soul. I saw my body lying on a bed in the emergency center, and I was looking down on my body from above. The doctors were working hard to resuscitate me. The feeling was amazing to me. I felt as if my soul was independent of my body. My consciousness was very clear in the process, as if I had rediscovered the essence and meaning of life. A peaceful aura permeated around me, as if I was in a world of infinite expanse. I could feel a mysterious force flowing around me, which surprised me. Although my body was still in danger, my soul was given a peace and calm like never before. This experience gave me a whole new understanding and sense of life. My soul began to rise uncontrollably and I felt some panic and uneasiness. The ascent was so fast that I felt like a rising rocket. My body was no longer bound to me, and I seemed to be floating in the clouds. Soon, I stopped on a platform. The platform was huge and I felt surrounded by love. My senses became sharper and I could feel every tiny change. This space was so big that it seemed to have no boundaries. I was like a free spirit who could fly at will. This feeling was wonderful. Suddenly, I heard a voice. "Welcome to this place." I don't know where the voice came from, but it made me feel very calm. I saw a dazzling light, and then a gorgeous angel appeared in front of me. She was dressed in a gorgeous white robe and held a long, shining golden sword in her hand. Her long hair fluttered, looking even more divine and beautiful. As she approached me, all my pain and anxiety vanished. She reached out and gently embraced me, making me feel a warmth and comfort that I had never felt before. She told me that she was my guardian angel. The angel led me through a door and we came to a spacious room. This room was amazing, it was like an open-air movie theater. It was very comfortable and relaxing. The screen started to show my past life. There were some good memories, such as scenes with my family and friends, and some moments that made me feel happy. Some are not so good experiences, such as the difficulties and setbacks I experienced, as well as my faults and mistakes in some occasions. Some of these scenes made me feel sad, some made me feel happy, and some made me rethink my behavior and the way I do things. The angel stood quietly by my side, not saying a word, just being silent and companionable. The angel told me, "I am ready to take you to another place, are you ready?" I looked at her white wings and imagined what it would be like to fly. I took a deep breath and decided to follow the angel forward. The angel led me through a passage. Eventually, we came to a vast place. Here was a paradise full of peace and joy. Inside the paradise were lush green grass and rainbow-like flowers, as well as a bright starry sky and warm sunshine. This place makes me feel endlessly joyful and peaceful. Here, I felt like I had found my true home. I feel that the boundary between me and heaven has been broken. There was love and eternal hope. Suddenly, an even brighter light illuminated the entire space. I felt myself surrounded by a powerful energy, an energy that made me feel incredibly peaceful. I turned my head and saw a figure. He was wearing a white robe, a golden crown on his head, and his eyes were filled with wisdom and compassion. I knew he was God. He smiled at me, then reached out to embrace me. I felt his endless love and forgiveness. He said to me, "My child, I know you have been through a lot and have endured a lot of pain and suffering in this world. But know that I am always there for you, always watching over you, always loving you." I began to pour out my confusion to God. I told God that I felt my work was meaningless and unfulfilling. I even began to wonder if my life had any meaning. God listened quietly to my confession, and then he answered me, "My child, you need to know that every single person on earth is very important. Each person is playing their own unique role, and each person is contributing in their own way. The job of a janitor, for example, may seem mundane, but it's actually very important. Their job is more than just cleaning up trash and keeping the environment sanitary. Without their dedication, public places would be filthy and could pose a health hazard that affects everyone's quality of life. He contributes to the health and safety of the entire community. Therefore, everyone's work is meaningful and has a very important role even if it seems ordinary. I never thought my work would have an impact on others. But now, God is telling me that I have a contribution to make to the world as well. He told me that I should see my work as a service. Because every little thing I do has an impact on others. In that moment, I felt my soul was uplifted and I had a new perspective on life and work. God told me it was time to go back and that I had to complete my unfinished mission. This decision did not leave me feeling depressed, on the contrary, it left me feeling motivated and enthusiastic. I thank God for giving me this opportunity to realize the meaning and value of my existence. I didn't beg God to let me stay, because I knew I had to go back to Earth. Go back to be a better version of myself. As the angel led me back to Earth, I felt like I had traveled through a time warp in a flash. We soon arrived at the hospital. I saw that the doctors were still resuscitating me. The nurse next to me told the doctor, "We've done all we can, his heart has stopped." I started to become nervous. Looking at my body lying there, I felt that my fate had been like a falling leaf, without support and reliance. When I looked at the angel next to me, the angel seemed to understand what I meant. She placed her hand on the spot of my heart. After a while, the heart monitor began to show beating lines. The angel told me, "Get back into your body." My soul and body reconnected. My body began to feel the world around me and hear the voices of the medical staff and the sound of instruments. As I slowly opened my eyes, I saw the white walls and ceiling of a hospital room. My mind was still a little confused. I moved my body gently and noticed that my muscles were still a little stiff. A doctor asked me with concern how I was feeling. I tried to say something, but my throat hurt, so I nodded. The doctors told me that I was experiencing cardiac arrest. Fortunately, they didn't give up on me and managed to pull me back from the death line. The doctor asked if I was feeling any discomfort. I told him I felt a little dizzy and weak, but was still conscious. He told me to stay in the hospital for a while to recuperate. After the doctor left the room, I began to think back to everything that had just happened. When I told the doctor about meeting the angel, his expression became very surprised, as if he was listening to a fairy tale. He still listened carefully to my account without interrupting me. I described in detail the experience of seeing an angel outside the operating room, being taken to heaven, and talking to God. After listening to my narrative, the doctor was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. Finally, he took a deep breath. Then he told me that at that time in the operating room, my vital signs had disappeared and it looked like there was no hope. But, just at the moment he was about to give up, he heard a voice telling him not to give up and to hold on for 2 more minutes. The doctor also told me that this condition is known as paranormal in medical terms. He couldn't fully understand it, but chose to believe everything I said. My family and friends continued to visit me, bringing me many blessings and encouragement. The doctors and nurses also took very good care of me. A few days later, the doctor announced that I was ready to be discharged from the hospital. On the way home, I felt very grateful and blessed. I was very grateful to the angel who accompanied me so that I could come back here. I am also grateful to the doctor who did not give up and allowed me to have life again. Most of all, I should thank God for showing me the way forward. There are some things in the world that cannot be explained by science. After this experience, I paid more attention to my physical and mental health and tried to make myself a better person. I firmly believe that this experience will stay with me and give me a deeper life experience.
I used to be a long-distance runner, and long-distance running is a high-intensity sport. The repetitive motion and stress on my joints over a long period of time, along with possible trauma and strain, caused some damage to my joints. Over time, these injuries accumulated, causing degeneration and inflammation in my joints, which eventually developed into arthritis. My legs would often become painful and sometimes it was very difficult for me to walk. I was treated conservatively at first, but there was no improvement. During my treatment, I spent a lot of time in prayer and Bible study. Then the doctor suggested that I should have surgery this time, because the conservative treatment was not effective. We later set a date for the surgery. I contacted my family and asked them to pray for me. On the morning of my surgery, the nurse said to me that I was the most relaxed person she had ever seen before surgery. Upon entering the operating room, they gave me an anesthetic. My consciousness started to become fuzzy. After a while, I felt very uncomfortable. My heart started to become irregular and it felt like it was about to stop. My breathing also became more and more difficult, as if a force was preventing me from breathing. I tried to open my eyes, but I couldn't feel my body. I felt so scared that my body started to struggle constantly, but I couldn't control it. In the process, I realized that I was experiencing a severe physical reaction, possibly to a drug allergy or other complications. I hoped the doctor would act quickly to help me regain normal breathing and heartbeat. After a few more moments, the world went quiet and my pain disappeared. When I opened my eyes, I found myself on the ceiling of my room. I heard the doctor ordering the nurse to get more blood bags. My face looked pale. I knew it was my own body, but I didn't feel alarmed or worried. I made my way through the walls of the room and into the hospital hallway. I felt no resistance as I crossed the wall. While I was in the hallway, I noticed an elevator door open. A man rushed out. His anxiety caught my attention. He was wearing a black jacket, and he was carrying a briefcase. He walked hurriedly toward the operating room, slowing down at the entrance to the operating room. He was having a conversation with another doctor. I don't remember the content of their conversation, but I know the man was also a doctor. They were arguing, and the doctor was complaining about the doctor in the black coat. Suddenly, I started to go through the hospital ceiling, as if I were being pulled by some mysterious force. I continued to rise until I crossed the roof and found myself over the hospital. After I got out of the hospital, I started to go over the city at a faster speed. I was moving so fast that I should have felt the wind blowing past me, but I felt none of this. I entered a cave-like area where I moved quickly for some time. Then, a small bright light appeared ahead of me. I came into the light. I saw the back of a man ahead of me. I subconsciously thought I should follow him. He had very long hair and was wearing a long white robe of a coarse material, and he had sandals on his feet. He smiled and waved to me, inviting me to come closer to him. As I approached him, I felt an unspeakable joy and peace. I felt his presence was so kind and warm that I did not feel distant or unfamiliar with him. He welcomed me with open arms. Here, I reviewed my life with him. I saw something that made me feel proud. It was in my college days when I joined a volunteer organization. We would go to a nearby community every week to help the elderly and children there. I would clean their rooms, talk with them, and take the kids to play games with them. One time, I saw an old grandmother who hadn't been out for a long time because of her poor health, so I accompanied her to the park for a walk. That afternoon, we walked along the garden. The grandmother always had a smile on her face. This experience gave me a deep sense of the joy and meaning of helping others. However, as we look back on my life, I also see a bad thing that makes me feel ashamed and remorseful. During my college years, I copied someone else's answers in an exam and ended up getting a good grade. When I saw this incident, I felt guilty and regretful. I knew I had cheated myself and my professors. When it was all over, I turned my head and looked at Jesus. His expression was gentle and forgiving, without reproach or praise. I felt a little nervous and worried, wondering what he thought of me. After a while of silence, Jesus suddenly spoke up and asked if I wanted to hang out with him. I felt a little surprised, but I also felt very happy. I replied, "Sure." We walked up a flight of steps, and before us was a gorgeous idyllic landscape. The meadow was full of bright flowers, which I had never seen before. There was a small river in the meadow. We came to the river, and on the other side I saw loved ones who had died. They were gathered together. I saw my father and grandfather first. They saw me, too, and they were as excited as I was. One of them I didn't recognize, but I later learned that it was my great-grandfather. He had passed away before I was born, so I had never met him. We communicated through telepathy. When I thought about hugging them on the other side of the river, Jesus told me that now was not the time. I followed him for another distance along the river. I saw a beautiful Greek-style building in the distance. It was vibrant white and had many steps leading up to it. There were huge columns in front of the door. Many people were wearing vibrant white robes. Jesus led me inside. Inside was like a huge library filled with books. This is the library of heaven, in which are kept all the books of the world, Jesus said, pointing to the bookshelves around him. I was so surprised and excited that I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up a book at random. The words on the pages of the book gave off a strong glow that made me feel a surge of energy flowing out of the pages. I wanted to open the book and look at it, but found that the words on it were not in a language I was familiar with. Jesus seemed to see my confusion. These books contain all kinds of knowledge, some of which you cannot understand at the moment. Here you can learn anything you want to learn. I continued to rummage through the bookshelves and found a book filled with musical notation. I found that it contained all the music on earth, both classical and modern, and their scores were fully recorded in this book. Jesus looked at me, smiled, and said, "This library is not only for learning, but it can also help you discover your potential and become more complete." Jesus walked toward a bookshelf, picked up a book and handed it to me. I opened the book and inside was a record of my entire life. Everything from my childhood days to today. Jesus looked at me and then said, "These are your histories, and I know every moment you have experienced, for better or worse, and I love you. I have always been there for you." Jesus then said, "Now, I give you a choice, you can choose to go back to earth and continue your journey or stay here with me." I felt an irresistible force pulling me toward Jesus. I knew I wanted to stay here and be with him. His love and attention made me feel more at ease than I had ever felt before. I said to Jesus, "Can I see my family now?" The next thing I saw was the hospital scene. The doctor was talking to my mother. I couldn't hear their conversation, I just saw the scene. I saw scenes of family and friends saying prayers. Each prayer appeared like a note, one after the other, stretching toward where I was. I remembered that my father died when I was very young. My mother worked very hard to raise me. If I choose to stay, I shudder to think of her life afterwards. As difficult as it was to leave this place of love, I knew I had to go back. Jesus told me, "If you choose to go back, most of the memories of being here will be erased." When I answered Jesus that I wanted to go back to earth, he smiled and nodded his head. Jesus reached out and gently stroked my head. He said, "Don't be afraid, I will always be by your side to protect you and guide you." Then, I felt myself return to my body. My consciousness gradually became clear. I slowly opened my eyes and found myself lying in a hospital bed. A doctor was beside me, carefully observing my condition. I took a deep breath and felt my strength return. I knew that Jesus was always by my side, guiding me and taking care of me. I felt energized again. I knew that my experience was completely real. The love of Jesus stayed with me during those weeks. I was in the hospital for 12 days after the surgery, first in the ICU and then in the general ward. I was completely confident that I would recover because I knew I was back here for a reason. I still remember how surprised I was when the doctor who saved me came to visit me for the first time. We had never met before that time, and he was the doctor in the black jacket. This doctor was very welcoming. Shortly after I returned home, I shared my experience with my mother. I told her that my soul left my body while I was undergoing surgery. I saw the doctor with the black jacket in the hallway. When I shared my experience in heaven with my mother, she began to doubt what I was saying and didn't seem to believe that I had actually experienced it. But when I mentioned that I had also met my great-grandfather in heaven, my mother's expression suddenly became serious. She asked me to describe in detail what he looked like, trying to determine if I had actually seen him. I began to describe his appearance. I said he was tall, with a white beard on his face and a mole under his right eye. I also described some conversations I had with him. My mother was stunned to hear this, because I had never seen my great-grandfather before. There was no picture of him in the house either. My mother knew I was not lying. This fact shocked her and made her even more convinced of the existence of heaven because great-grandfather looked exactly as I had described. It was no coincidence that she came to truly believe that I had seen Jesus in heaven.